Welcome, everybody, to another speech about rhetoric, public address, public speaking here on my channel. I'm Dr. Steve Yano, and I teach an online public speaking course as well as argumentation and other courses for the university I work at. And I feel like putting these videos on YouTube is the best way for those students to access these videos, but it's not really a big loss if you access them too. Hope you learned something. If you like the videos you see here, I'd appreciate a like, or you can subscribe to the channel. Have you ever thought about what it means to have a successful speech? Seems rather obvious what that should be. The audience should say, yeah, you're right. We agree with you. But it's not the starting point for having a successful speech. This video's point is to say that we think about public speaking and oratory the wrong way. We start with agreement when there's so much that has to build up to make it to agreement. Normally, in a public speaking course or in formal public speaking instruction, they focus on modalities of speech. They talk about what it means to give an informative speech, what it means to give a persuasive speech, and what it means to give a ceremonial speech or speech of praise. I don't think those divisions are useful one bit. I think that when we teach those divisions, they're very harmful because they make it seem that there are things that are outside the realm of speech itself. It's up to the rhetor to convince the audience they're being informed. It's up to the rhetor to convince the audience that something's being praised. It's definitely up to the rhetor to convince the audience they're being persuaded. No rhetor who wants an easy job is going to tell the audience, I'm here to change everything you do, 180 degrees. I'm here to change your mind. Instead, they're going to say, this is a speech of pure information. And if they present it in terms of facts and persuasion, the way the audience likes it, in terms of facts and information, then the audience is going to say, wow, that's good information. And they're going to be persuaded without even knowing it. So I feel like we do a lot of harm, professional public speaking teachers, to people by dividing speeches up in terms of informative and persuasive and ceremonial. Instead, we ought to teach the three concurrent goals of public speaking that build on one another. The goals of oratory. Those goals are 1, achieve understanding, 2, achieve empathy, and 3, achieve agreement. The third one, agreement, that's where we all want to be, but it's very difficult to get there and it might not look the way you want it to. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So let's talk about some of these other terms first. On the channel, in the first video for the semester, I used the hashtag SJU Speech Spring 20, and that's for my course. But I also thought of another really good hashtag for the course, Yanoratory, which is a combination of my surname, Yano, and oratory, Yanoratory. So use that hashtag if you're sharing the video, and I think several hundred people might get to know who I am, which I think would be great. I mean, I already have 100 followers on the channel, which is great. I really appreciate it. What if I had 150? I mean, I think Yanoratory could be the thing that really pushes us to the next level. So use the hashtag if you like these videos and you want to share them. It'd be great. I'd appreciate it. The first goal of any good speech, the first marker of success, is understanding. Understanding is communicated through the simple sentence, I get what you're saying. I know what you're saying. I understand it. I get it. This is on the level of logic, semantics, words, information, and facts. They understand and recognize all the things you're saying as good information, as based on stuff that's believable. There's 2 levels to this. The basic level is fluency. Are you speaking to them the way a human being speaks to another one? Think about what I'm doing here. I'm speaking to you. I'll never see you face to face, but I'm performing as if we're talking face to face, or that at least I can see you. I'm talking to you like a human being. A lot of times speakers take a piece of paper. They read from it. They look up and they're transmitting. They're transmitting to you the information. This doesn't convey understanding. All it does is think of your audience as a transmission or reception tower or something to download information onto. It's not good. Understanding means that the audience can see that what you're saying makes sense and that they have time to reflect and think about it. So fluency, speaking with pauses, speaking with tone, and stretching words out when they're really important, like I just did there with really, are all tools to help understanding. Sometimes people speak too fast because they're nervous, or they speak too quietly because they feel like they might be shouting, or that their tone of voice might be assertive or aggressive. What you have to do is practice and make sure that everyone can comfortably hear you and that people have time to digest your words. You don't want to just race through your content. I think from our hyper-mediated environment, things like YouTube or television or radio or music, whatever, podcasts, we feel like every second of a presentation has to be filled with speech. It's not the case. Pauses and hesitations help the audience reflect and make sure they're really getting what it is you have to offer. These things help a lot in the basic level of understanding. But let's go deeper. More complex ways to make sure the audience understands you. The first one is what I call source transparency. And in high school, you might have heard it as citing your sources. Source transparency shows the audience that you're like them and that you had to go and look at what experts and researchers and other people had to say, either eyewitnesses who provide their testimony or scholars who've been looking at a problem for 20 years. What do they have to say about it? Can you share your insights of looking at that information with the audience? This might sound like a weakness, but there's absolutely no virtue in just saying that you know things are true. I don't understand why politicians do that, and I don't understand why politics is conducted that way, to say it's true that, and then there's no source transparency. There's a real equivalency that's developed between you and the audience at moments like that, where you say, look, I'm just like you. I'm just an average guy, and I had to go look this up, and here's what I found, and here's what I came to understand that meant. Source transparency is a wonderful way to show the audience, here's where I got this, and here's my source. And then they can attack your source. Yeah, sure, they can say it's liberal or conservative, but there's another deeper way you can respond to that, and that's source variety. Science isn't based on objective truth. Science is based on what we call intersubjective validity, which means many different people under the same conditions are getting the same information from the same actions. Intersubjective reliability is the gold standard in scientific reasoning. It means that if I conduct an experiment here in New York City and someone does it in China under the same conditions, we get the same result. Very, very, very important standard of information for science. But if we're talking about poetry or art, that's not going to do it. So how do we make sure that we have a variety of different sources showing our point of view? Well, look for perspective. There's political perspective, but there's also perspectives on things like economics and medicine. And there's perspectives on all kinds of fields out there. Different doctors trained in different ways who subscribe to different theories are going to come up with different ideas about how to treat a patient. Likewise, different art critics schooled in different ways are going to look at a painting or a statue a different way. The point is, you want to have a variety of different perspectives that speak to what you understand the right position to be. Source variety and source transparency, both incredibly important concepts to help make your speech understandable. Finally, rich explanations. A lot of times people think I'm just going to tell them what I think and what else can I say? You can say it in 2 or 3 different ways to give the audience 3 or more pathways to see things your way. This means you have to use rich and colorful metaphors. You have to use adjectives. You have to describe it from different points of view. You have to rephrase it in ways that you think will be more accessible to your audience. There's no substitute for doing the work of figuring out what it is your audience is like and what they want and what they're about. That's really important. You have to do that. So that's understanding. That's the first and the most basic foundational level of speech success. The next level, and much more difficult to achieve than understanding, even though that sounds pretty hard, is empathy. This is where people don't just say, I understand you, but, oh, I feel you. I'm passionate about that too. I can see why you're so upset. I'm upset about this too. This is where you connect emotionally with the audience to the point where they start to identify with your topic. It's the difference between saying, I understand your speech and why it's important to you, and I really care about this. I should care about this too. It's a huge leap. So how do we get that emotional understanding? Well, one of the things we have to think about if we want empathy in our speech is what it means to identify with an issue, to make it our own. And anything you can say and do to show the audience that this is their issue will help them achieve empathy. For example, if you've done the appropriate audience research, you know what they already care about, what they feel strongly about, what they're emotional about. And in empathy, you can make those connections to say, you already care about these things. Do an inventory of the audience's principles. These are their highest value judgments they have, the guidelines that set all of their actions as ethical and good. If you can work what you're trying to get them to do or believe or feel into the idea of empathy, into something they already care about deeply, you are well on your way to getting them to identify with your issue. Some more specifics. Telling stories here are important. Stories of caring, stories of judgment, and stories of feeling. Now, what are the differences there? Stories of feeling are stories that are meant to elicit an emotional response. Oh, I feel so bad for that person. Or, wow, that really cheered me up. That was very inspirational. Stories of caring are stories where instead of just feeling, they say, oh, I want to care like that person did, or I want to care about these people. I want to act in some way. I want my feelings to be involved rather than just receiving feelings. I want to give those feelings too. So stories of feeling, stories of caring. And then finally, stories of judgment, which are the kind of stories that audiences really like, where they can really come down on someone for being a bad actor or for being badly motivated, or really praise someone for being purely motivated by the best intentions, or being somebody who is motivated by altruistic goals. They just want to do good in the world. I think both of those are really good ways of thinking about stories of judgment. These stories help the audience take a role and work with you, as you'll see in the next video, be your co-conspirator or your co-author, and pass judgment on different kinds of perspectives people can take on the issue through the world and through life. So I know what you're saying. I get it. I feel passionate about what you're saying. I really feel it. I'm emotionally invested. I identify with what you're saying. Those are the first two steps. The last one and most difficult is agreement. What does it mean to agree with someone? It means to say, you're right, and I agree with you. I now have your position as my own. I am also going to advocate that same position that you have. Agreement's the most difficult one to achieve. Most of your speeches and presentations are not going to get agreement, and it's kind of a fantasy and probably bad teaching to teach people that an audience is going to be like, yes, I agree with you after an 8 or 7 minute speech. First of all, you don't want a society like that. That's an unreflective, non-critical judgment. You want people to digest and think about things and not instantly change their mind. Shutting somebody down and bending somebody to their will is not the kind of thinking and the kind of approach to information that we want in a critical, democratic society of people who think about their commitments and principles and actions as a connected identity and a process that makes them who they are. You don't want people just turning on a dime. That's not good. So this idea that you're going to come in with your sharp words and just change people's mind is not only a fantasy, it's very unhealthy for a democratic order. So agreement might be thought of as a long game, as a long-term thing, but there are ways to get that agreement seed planted and agreement to kind of start working with the people you're talking to. The first one is managing the choices they have to make. So one of the bad things that's taught about agreement is that when you go in to convince an audience, you're having them do a 180-degree pivot on an issue. That's not true. Most persuasive issues and most asks in public speaking and oratory are a 30-degree pivot at the most, maybe a 40-degree pivot at the most, because of the skill of the rhetor, the skill of the speaker, to say you're already headed in this direction. I just want a little change in judgment from you. So instead of thinking about what you want them to do as opposite of what they're doing now, think about the principles, the practices, and the beliefs they already have that are commensurate with what you want them to do. Seek out agreement. Don't seek out points where you disagree. Seek out points where you already agree in practice or in principle with them to show them that the alignment that you want is a small tweak. You're only asking them to do the last 2 steps, the 8 biggest steps they've already done or they've already committed to. Their values are the same. One of the most brilliant ways you can do this as a speaker is to show them that you're there to help them get all their principles and actions in alignment with something that's better that they might not be aware of. They might not understand that what they're doing now and what they believe now and what they espouse now is out of line with their principles and their values. So you come in and say, look, if you believe this, if you're already practicing this, why don't you do this other thing? It seems weird that you don't. It seems out of sync that you don't. And then agreement can come from that because they'll say, yeah, we should add that to what we already do. So think about the difference there. Instead of you have to abandon your principles and what you already do and what you already believe and what you already feel and think versus I'm giving you a new piece to add to that to make that more robust. That's what agreement is. And that's how agreement, I think, truly works. Identification here too with communities and admirable figures is very important. What are the communities they imagine themselves involved in? What important figures do they identify with already? These are the things that can help you persuade that audience to agree with you. But don't feel bad if they don't. It might take a few days, or you might be planting the seeds for the words of someone else to move them towards your conclusion. You've done the empathy work, you've done the understanding work, and they'll turn in about 2 or 3 weeks when they hear someone else talk about this idea, or they share your thoughts because they're passionate about it with someone else, and it changes their mind. So you really don't know your influence. If the audience doesn't respond at the time, that's fine. You're planting seeds. You're starting that process of getting them to come around to your view. Instant decision making, probably not going to happen, and probably bad. You want thoughtful converts. You don't just want converts to your view. There are some mixtures here that have some pretty odd results. Like, what if you only have 2 and not 3? What do you get? Well, the first one would be understanding and agreement. You don't have any empathy. So they agree with you and they understand you, but they're just passionless about it. This is somebody who's like, yeah, that is the way it should be. I totally agree. All the facts are there, but it's not for me. I'm not political. I'm not the one who's going to do it. Or what could I do? I'm just one guy. What actions could I take? And so this is kind of the disaffected political position. And it's something that can happen if you don't pay attention to the empathy point. Remember, without passion, there's not going to be any motive for them to change anything. They're going to understand it on paper, understand it technically, but not feel any kind of motive or emotional investment to work on what it is you've suggested that they do. The second combination is understanding and empathy without agreement. And this is sort of the seed planting one that I talked about earlier, where someone can feel very, very passionate about it. They can understand it, but they're like hesitant to agree with you. They're hesitant to draw the final conclusion, but they do think it's very important and they really understand all the information and facts you've given. So this is the kind of person who's kind of like a seed vault. They go out and seed your idea to other people and maybe persuade them. Or maybe if someone else draws the conclusion for them, they'll agree. But what it means for us as public speakers is we never did quite close the deal. They love the thing. They understand it and how it works. They understand what it is that you're saying, but it just couldn't close the deal. So that's that one. Not necessarily a bad result, not as horrible as the first one, I think, which is the political disaffected one. That one is kind of disappointing. The second one could be the seed of some future agreement, so there's some hope there. And the final one is kind of the crazy one, which is empathy and agreement, which is total emotional charge and agree with you just based on passion. And these people often will come up to you and say, yeah, you're absolutely right. I feel so strongly about this. And then they tell stories about their dog and their family. They don't really reference anything you said in the speech. So this can be a sign that you didn't really convey understanding. You didn't get the information out there. You didn't build that structure very well. So you hooked them in some way, but you really didn't do it in a very critical and healthy way to where they're on the same page with you. You sort of triggered something in them that got agreement and passion that was already there, but they're not going to support your view in the way that's based on the information you provided. And someone's going to be able to reject your view because they're going to want to look at that understanding point, and it's not going to be there when these people go tell others about what your advocacy is. This is also not a very healthy response, although it's nice to have communicated passion or gotten someone passionate. It needs to be based on the understanding information that drove your passion in the first place. This can also come out, and this happens to me a lot, where people ignore the understanding completely and come to me. They're like, wow, you're great. I could listen to you all day. You are just a wonderful, passionate, engaging speaker. How do you know how to do that? How are you not nervous? So the focus is purely on the structure of the speech and the way the speech is presented, and not on any of the topic or the thing I wanted them to believe or change their mind about. They're much, much more interested in the presentational aspect of it. And that's what they identify with and get passionate about. And they just, they agree with me. They're like, yeah, you're great. Everything you had to say was right on, but I want to know about that. That's what's inspiring to me. So a focus on pure structure probably means that empathy is out of sync with understanding. And that happens to me all the time. I don't know why, but that's what I have to work on. You might have to work on another one of these ratios in your oratory practice, but it's different for everybody. And once you fix one, another problem will show up because it's an art, not a science. Speech is an art. So those are the 3 goals of speech. Which one is your favorite? Which one do you think is most difficult? Which one do you not understand well? Leave me a comment. I'll engage with you here on the channel. Good luck to you in your practices. I hope that this helps reframe the purpose of presentational speaking or oratory or public address for you, to think about those 3 levels of achievement. Very, very important that you don't leave any of them behind. You need to hook all 3 of them in order to have a chance of getting the audience to really connect with your advocacy.